Hello and welcome to The Gaggle, where we challenge and, if necessary, destroy media narratives. I'm George Szamuely. With me today, of course, is co-founder of The Gaggle, Peter Lavelle. So, Peter, the other day, the State Department issued a statement, a lengthy statement, accusing Russia of anti-Semitism. Now, that's very, very strange, because when you think of that the patron of Ukraine and the people who run Ukraine is the United States, nonetheless, the State Department wishes the world to know that it is Russia that is anti-Semitic. And I want to just show you this, a few choice excerpts from this document. And so here we have the, it's called "To Vilify Ukraine, the Kremlin resorts to anti-Semitism." And, it says, one of the Kremlin's most common disinformation narratives to justify its devastating war against the people of Ukraine is the lie that Russia is pursuing denazification of Ukraine. Russian President Vladimir Putin has referred to Ukraine's democratically elected government as a, quote, gang of drug addicts and neo-Nazis, while Russian state media and propagandists have repeatedly called for the denazification of the entire population of Ukraine. Then he goes on, by evoking Nazism and the horrors associated with World War II and the Holocaust, the Kremlin hopes to delegitimize and demonize Ukraine in the eyes of the Russian public and the world. The Kremlin attempts to manipulate international public opinion by drawing false parallels between Moscow's aggression against Ukraine and the Soviet fight against Nazi Germany, a source of pride and unity for many people of the former Soviet republics who made enormous sacrifices during World War II, including both Ukrainians and Russians. Well, that's very nice of them to acknowledge the Soviet contribution to victory in World War II, because over the past few years, the Americans have been notable for not acknowledging any contribution on the part of the Soviets. Apparently, it was entirely by the British and the Americans together pulled this out. And then he says, the Kremlin propagandists have found it tough to sell the fabricated denazification pretext for the Ukraine war, and they have resorted to increasingly ridiculous and often self-contradictory justifications. When critics point out that Ukraine's President Vladimir Zelensky, who won the 2019 election in Ukraine with 73% of the votes, is Jewish himself, with family members who were killed by Nazis, the Kremlin disseminates false narratives attempting to delegitimize his Jewishness. The Kremlin falsely claims the worst Nazis were actually Jews and seeks to downplay the role of anti-Semitism in Nazi ideology. Of course, we did a video, remember when Lavrov made that comments in the interview, that's not what he said. He didn't say the worst Nazis were actually Jews. That's not what he said.
He didn't say that, and they don't quote him and they don't reference it.
Exactly, there's no link to that. He was talking about, some of the worst anti-Semites were Jews, just some of them. But he didn't say the worst Nazis were actually Jews, because that would obviously be an absurd thing to say. And then, Russia's corrupt former president, deputy chairman of the country's Security Council, Dmitry Medvedev. So Medvedev, he used to be the darling of the West. You remember how much they loved Medvedev? So that's gone out of the window. He's now a corrupt former president. He has argued that Zelensky has lost his Jewish identity. And then one of the Kremlin's most prominent propagandists, Soloviev, even claimed Zelensky was not really Jewish, while Soloviev's associates and state-owned media falsely accused Ukraine's president of betraying his Jewish family and ancestors. Well, Soloviev himself is Jewish. So then the argument would work against you, because after all, if Soloviev is Jewish, you can hardly call him anti-Semitic. I mean, that makes no, you've just said, well, you can't possibly be a Nazi if you're a Jew. You can't be anti-Semitic if you're a Jew. Well, why does that apply to Zelensky, but not apply to Soloviev?
Well, and this is their typical writing style here, okay? Okay, falsely accused Ukraine's president of betraying his Jewish family and ancestors. That's not what is in play right now. What is in play here, and they won't talk about it, is that Zelensky is Jewish. No one is denying that, okay? What's really, the fact that he's Jewish only is important in the sense that he's made common cause with neo-Nazis. That's what the issue is here.
Exactly.
They have not presented it that way. Okay,
That's exactly right. And there's no reason why a Jew cannot make common cause with Nazis. I mean, we were already talking about Kolomoisky, who did fund the Azov battalion, and Kolomoisky funded both Zelensky and the Azov battalion. I mean, they're all clients of his.
And let's be clear, everyone. The type of fascistic Nazi ideology we're talking about, it's not as straightforward as historical narratives in the West would have us think. With these people, these neo-Nazis that we have in Ukraine, which do exist, it's very well documented. Who is the object of their hatred? It's not necessarily Jews now, it's Russians. Exactly. They're the Jews in this paradigm here. Right. I know that's difficult for Western media to understand because they're so damn lazy.
That's right. That's right. Yeah. No, that's exactly. They evidently skipped over the parts of Mein Kampf in which Hitler ranted and raved against the Slavs, and in particular against the Russians. So they somehow just didn't notice that part of Mein Kampf. And then, having already made the point, they decided to repeat it. In May, Russia's Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov attempted to counter an Italian journalist's question about Zelensky's heritage with an anti-Semitic conspiratorial rant and a Holocaust distortion, speculating that Adolf Hitler had Jewish blood too, and adding that wise Jewish people say that the most ardent anti-Semites are usually Jews. Again, kind of misquoting him. But the issue of, whether Hitler had Jewish blood or not, I mean, that's not Lavrov's theory. I mean, that's a theory that many people have, that, no one knows. We know about his grandmother, Schicklgruber, may or may not have been Jewish. I mean, that's just simply other people have presented this as speculative. Some people have done DNA and said that he didn't have Jewish blood. But either way, it's kind of a bizarre thing to say that there's something anti-Semitic about that, because on the contrary, if he did have Jewish blood, then you'd have to say, well, it just shows how stupid Nazi theories of Aryan purity are. I mean, the great anti-Semite himself had Jewish blood. I mean, so there's nothing anti-Semitic about it, even if you say Hitler had Jewish blood.
Let's take a step back, everyone. The way this is being presented is that anti-Semitism is somehow some kind of respected worldview. No, it's garbage. Okay. It's ridiculous, and people give it legitimacy where it doesn't belong. It doesn't. It's elevating something that shouldn't be elevated.
Right. Exactly. That's right. As if somehow completely outrageous to suggest anything like that. As if somehow exactly the anti-Semitic view of somehow that you have something called pure. You're pure Aryan. You don't have any Jewish blood. As if that's a serious point of view.
Exactly.
And then all the rest, which we'll talk about the Israel thing, and then well before Lavrov's remarks, Russian intelligence linked outlets and Kremlin propagandists have long spread disinformation propaganda targeting Zelensky's Jewishness and Ukraine's relations with Israel. Contradicting more recent disinformation, President Putin's former economic advisor, Sergei Glaziev, accused Zelensky in 2019 of planning to replace the Russian-speaking population of eastern and southern parts of Ukraine with Israeli Jews. Now there's a link, they went for a link to this, what it was that Glaziev said, and that's not quite what he said. Here's what he actually said. I'll show you here. He says, there are, of course, nuances associated with the heterogeneity of the interests of Western puppeteers. Perhaps the bet on Zelensky, made long before these elections, so he wrote this in 2019, is connected with the general tilt of the Trump administration towards the extreme right forces in Israel. They will probably set new tasks for the renewed Kiev regime. I do not exclude, for example, the possibility of a mass move to the lands of the southeast of Ukraine, cleaned from the Russian population of the inhabitants of the promised land, who are tired of the permanent war in the Middle East, just like Christians fleeing from Islamizing Europe. By the way, this was already the case in the region under Catherine, who founded the native city for the new Kiev leaders. So the issuance of Russian passport to Ukrainians may come in handy. So he's just simply saying that this might happen if, as he says, particularly said the Trump administration towards the extreme right force in Israel, and if there's a mass move out of Israel because of the tiredness, tired of the wars. Well, we don't have to discuss what he's saying. He's not saying that Zelensky is planning on cleansing Ukraine of Russians and replacing them with Jews from Israel. I mean, that's not what he's suggesting. He's saying that this might happen. In particular,
this is the first I've heard this. Okay.
Well, first I heard of it. I mean, I simply followed the link. I mean, that was the link on the State Department. Imagine, they're all sitting there going through all these.
Oh yeah, of course. They've been working on this article for months.
Yeah. And then it says, following Lavrov's remarks, Soloviev and other pundits on Russian state television asserted Nazism does not necessarily imply anti-Semitism, but can instead reflect so-called Russophobia. Again, that's not what they said. They said that anti-Semitism is not the only aspect of Nazism. I mean, no one's going to be stupid enough to say, yeah, that is that. No one says it's stupidly that anti-Semitism is not a part of Nazism.
It's like Whoopi Goldberg thinking that racism is the only form of racism that exists is that whites hating blacks. Okay, so racism has a lot of different variations all through history. Okay, exactly. Not just white black.
That's right. That's right. And then Russia's disinformation and propaganda ecosystem then sought to buoy officials' false claims by further attacking Zelensky, alleging Hitler's alleged Jewish origins, and attempting to discredit Israeli leaders. A disinformation outlet linked to Russian military intelligence, One World, never heard of it, described Lavrov's critics as Hitler-like racist for suggesting one's ethno-religious identity at birth predetermines one's political.
But it's the State Department that is focused on ethno-religious identity. Exactly. They're the ones that are promoting this narrative. Exactly right. It's not coming from Russia.
Exactly, and that's what it says. They, describe Lavrov's critics as Hitler-like racists for suggesting one's ethno-religious identity at birth predetermines one's political views. Yeah, that's exactly what you're saying. You're saying, well, Zelensky can't possibly be this because he's a Jew, and therefore that precludes any possibility that he could have any sympathy with the Nazis around him. I mean, that's what you're saying. He's saying, well, because he's Jewish, that rules it out completely.
Norman Finkelstein is a perfect example, okay? So he is a strident critic of Israel and of Zionism, and so he's a self-hating Jew. That's how he's referred to, okay? Right. And it has nothing to do with his Jewishness, okay? Yeah. He's a child of Holocaust survivors, okay? Yeah. He has an attitude about Nazism, about fascism, about Israel, but it's not determined because of the fact that he's Jewish. Has nothing to do with it, even though his critics say has everything to do with it.
That's right. That's exactly right. And then this is very funny. There is no better way to understand the Kremlin's propaganda and disinformation than to, quote, peek behind the curtain and see what goes on inside the apparatus. And then he says, on June the 5th, the Security Service of Ukraine published what it identified as a report from the Russian Federal Security Service on disinformation themes the Russian government should promote to improve the informational propagandistic support of its special military operation in Ukraine. So this is our reliable source. What the Security Service of Ukraine has published. Well, let us see what the Ukraine.
This is where the argument is clinched, right here. Okay.
Exactly.
Really?
Yes.
Really?
Yes. The FSB concluded, so this is from this Ukrainian report, that Russia had inadequately supported the denazification claim and recommended a massive injection of allegations accusing Ukrainian nationalists of killing children in the so-called Donetsk People's Republics and Lugansk People's Republics. And then the FSB also called for the creation of a network of propagandists to spread the fabrications, including using Russian and Ukrainian World War II veterans in staged videos where participants would call on Russia to stop fascism in Ukraine. Lastly, the FSB recommended establishing anti-fascist front groups in the post-Soviet space and targeting the European Union with disinformation, claiming life in Europe is worsening because of its support for the Ukrainian Nazis. So this is this is straight from the horse's mouth.
Such hackery, such hackery.
Anyway, so the Russians, of course, this is the usual unconscionable narrative, blah blah, and then the Russians responded to this, with your friend Zaharova, and then they say, that this document claims that Russian officials and state-run media are spreading fake stories about the atrocities and massacres of the nationalist battalions, the Nazi identity of Ukrainian leadership, simply to justify war against Ukraine, which says, we have been leading this topic, and as they say, we have been distributing materials for a long time, long before February of this year. We call on the world community to conduct its own investigation, to pay attention to documentary materials to send to Ukraine, as Lavrov has repeatedly said, and said, it is presented in such a way that starting only from February of this year, so they're saying, this has been ongoing. And then it says that after the coup of February 2014, radical nationalist forces already present in the country, strengthened, blah, blah. In 2014, they were used on a large scale during the coup. The radicals began to openly preach the ideas of ethnic intolerance, including anti-Semitism, which, however, cannot be reduced to everything. Nationalism is a broader concept, and then as moral guidelines of society, such founders of Ukrainian nationalism as Petluria, Bandera, Stetsko, Shukevich, Melnik, and other war criminals are imposed. And then, let me remind you that the nationalist battalions, the Azov, Aidar, and others are incorporated into Ukrainian law enforcement. And then it says, 10 years ago, all this was perceived on the territory of Ukraine and the international community as marginal elements. At the same time, a coup d'etat was carried out on the shoulders of nationalists and so on. So with the coming to power of Zelensky, there were no real improvements in the fight against nationalist ideology, including anti-Semitism, illegal actions of right-wing radical and nationalist group, blah, blah. There were cases of desecration of religious and memorial objects. Nobody knows about this, haven't they heard about it in the West, in the State Department? And then it goes on. And this is clearly the important point. It is significant that only 2 UN member states, Ukraine and the United States, have been voting against the annual resolution of the UN General Assembly, which combating the glorification of Nazism, neo-Nazism, and other practices that contribute to the escalation of modern forms of racism and so on. Why are only 2 countries systematically voting against a resolution condemning neo-Nazism? And again, against this background, it's not surprising, Ukraine decided to withdraw from the agreement to perpetuate the memory of the courage and heroism of the Commonwealth of Independent States, the Great Patriotic War. This, however, does not prevent Zelensky from declaring that he allegedly honors the memory of his grandfather who fought in the Red Army. And this is lies and deceit. In words, you can say anything you want, but at the same time, real deeds diverge from what was said. We point to this a false agenda and a simulation of policy aimed at supposedly racial, religious, and national equality, and so on. But yeah, go on.
What's really interesting to me is that This looks like a pretty desperate concoction. It's not very
State Department, yeah.
Very weirdly sourced as usual.
Very.
But what about Ukraine's former ambassador to Germany? I mean, is the State Department going to condemn some of the things that he had to say about vendetta?
That's what I said.
Did the State Department step up? Okay, because those are real statements and said over and over again. Okay,
right.
I mean, it wasn't a one-off; it was a consistent thing. Okay, and with his departure from Ukraine, he's been kicked upstairs. Okay, he's been promoted. Okay, so it tells you everything about the State Department. You know, they get these underlings. You know, dig up everything you can, put it together. I mean, it's not very well written. It's not very coherent. It's out of context.
Right. No, I think that's right, and it's very interesting that they don't address. I mean, you talk about this ambassador, but all of the rehabilitation that's been taking place since 2004 of Nazis and neo-Nazis. I mean, you know, how many statues have been erected in Ukraine to Bandera, to Shukhevich, you know, all these other characters. I mean, you know, essentially these are all rehabilitated. Can you imagine, you know, in France, if there's people started putting up statues to Marshal Pétain, and Pétain, you know, he was a lot better than Bandera, but even so, you know, no one in France would put up statues to Marshal Pétain, and yet they pay no attention to any of this.
Well, and I think to further George's point here is that, and it's something that the Western audiences are not informed. George and I have known this for forever because, sure, there are people in Ukraine that see Vendetta as a great national hero. I understand that. It is true. Okay, they believe that. But there are millions and millions of Ukrainians that say, well, that's akin to worshiping Hitler. It is intolerable for us. It's intolerable. No, there's no compromise. There's like, okay, well, that's what you think, and you can have your. No. It's way beyond that. Okay, and that is this division which the West, U.S., Victoria Nuland, and all the rest of them have fueled it. They've pushed it. You know, does that make them fascist themselves? No, not necessarily, not at all. Okay, but it's a wedge. They know this is a wedge.
It's a wedge. But of course, the thing is that the U.S. record is very sordid because the U.S. has a history of promoting Nazis, neo-Nazis for its own political ends. I mean, there is a reason why tens of thousands of Nazis ended up in the United States. And in Canada, and then suddenly, you know, in the late 1970s, in other words, too late to make any difference, they suddenly woke up. Oh, well, we better find out about you know, all these Nazis. And incidentally, there wasn't a great mass expulsion of Nazis. I mean, a few were kicked out, but you know, very, very few. I mean, most of the time they were just lost in the appeals process, and then they died because they were just pretty old by the time of, you know, by 1980, they'd become very old, and so they died even as this whole process was taking place.
And because of that neglect for decades and forensic evidence disappearing, you know, what's the Demjanjuk? What was it?
Demjanjuk.
Well, you know, I remember that when it was going on. And you know what, George? It's just a tough one to call, okay? It's just a tough one to call. Right. I mean, asking people to, you know, on their memory for something 40, 50 years ago, okay? I'm not taking this guy's side at all. But what it tells me is what you were just saying here. I mean, why weren't you looking for them if you knew they were there, why didn't you do it in 48, 49, 50 when people had fresher memories, okay?
I mean, you know, somebody is 40 years older, I mean, it's very difficult to say, yeah, that's the person I remember from 40 years ago. We say, wow, people change a lot in 40 years.
Can you do that, George? Can you think of someone outside of family or maybe a close friend, you know, what they look like, you know, what they said to you 40 years ago?
No,
that's a tall order.
It's tall order, exactly. People look very, very different 40 years on.
And I'm not saying they shouldn't have done it. I just said, why did you wait so long? I mean, you knew about this.
Right. No, that's right. But in fact, that's really in most cases, all that happened is they moved to expel them by claiming that they lied on their application forms, to enter into the country. That's all. I mean, basically, they need to, we need to put them on trial for war crimes. They just said you lied on your immigration application form.
So that's the equivalent of mail fraud.
Yeah, exactly. And as I say, I mean, most of the time it was all inconclusive. There were endless appeals processes, and by the time it came to the actual expulsion from the country, the person was dead. I mean, because they'd already become so old. But the point is that America made use of them because it made use of Nazis. I mean, they were very useful during the Cold War. You can't then turn around and say, well, we're the sort of great champions of, the anti-fascism, since when? When did this happen that you were the great champions of anti-fascism? I mean, you backed the worst scum in Croatia. You backed, the worst scum in Ukraine. You do it for politically expedient purposes. And then you turn around, distort what Lavrov said. You're going to accuse him of anti-Semitism? It's really contemptible.
Again, the very fact that they went on this endeavor shows they know they're losing the argument. Okay, right. That's why they put time and resources into it, right. Because you don't have to believe Peter and George at the gaggle. When you can read Newsweek, okay, or the European Union reports on human rights in Ukraine. Way before 2014, way before that, okay? Right. I mean, it's all out there. It's extremely well documented. It's not being made out of thin air, okay?
Right. No, that's right. And remember, what was that party, that Svoboda, the one that was accused of being neo-Nazi by the European Union? And its leader was this guy, Tyanibok. And then there's that picture, the famous picture of Tyanibok with Victoria Nuland and Klitsch. They're all good friends together. And then remember, what was it? The name begins with P. Who went to visit McCain? Is it Pari?
There's Yarosh.
Yarosh, but there's another one. Pat P begins with P, but I can't remember. He's like Yarosh, yeah. But anyway, and he went to McCain's office and had a nice sit down, and they never had any problems. They've never had any problems at all dealing with Nazis. And now they turn around with this ridiculous claim that the Russians are anti-Semitic. And in fact, the case is very thin. I mean, it's thin. It's non-existent. So I say this article that they refer to. I mean, it was clearly a misinterpretation of what he was actually saying. You just think, well, there might be Israelis who are fleeing from Israel because they're tired of these endless wars. Might end up in Ukraine, after Zelensky kicks out all the Russians.
But what's going on right now? I mean, how can the U.S. State Department, with a straight face, publish this garbage when Poland again has reminded of the atrocities committed against Poles, I think 100,000 Poles, during the Second World War on the terrain of Ukraine at the hands of Bandera and his Confederates, okay? Right. I mean, so the Poles playing along with this too? Right. I mean, you get your story straight, okay? Yeah. One of your valued NATO EU members are telling the world and telling the Ukrainians that this is a black spot in our history. And it has to be acknowledged, okay? Right. Good old Poland is saying that now.
Right. Yeah. That's right. But I think they feel that. I mean, there's this woman, Deborah Lipstadt, who has been hired by the Biden administration. I think she's the person combating anti-Semitism. She may have some input in this document, but it is really ridiculous. And ultimately you say, well, how come then that you go every year before the United Nations General Assembly and you're the one country that votes against this? One country along with Ukraine. I mean, you're the only one. I mean, the EU scum that they are, they at least abstain. They don't vote in favor, but at least they abstain. I mean, when I say scum, I mean, it's particular scum, the Germans, because the Germans, you know, on this issue, you know, they don't have the choice of, you know, well, you know, we're just part of Europe, you know, we'll just abstain. You know, Germany doesn't have that luxury of abstaining. But
it should be the reverse. Okay,
right.
It should be leading. Okay.
Yes. Yes, exactly.
Okay, what is the rationale, the State Department's rationale for voting against this UN resolution? Is it infringement of freedom of speech? I don't really buy that at all. What I would say is, if these things are said, there should be pushback and win the argument. Okay, right. Win the argument. Yeah, people are going to say all kinds of crazy things. They always do, and you know, and it's important. You know, even crazy people have a right to talk, okay? I'm not going to deny them that. But my point is that the US shouldn't block it. It should vote for it and win the argument through debate, okay?
Right, exactly. And I mean, as far as I understand the resolution, I mean, they're talking about officially sanctioned rehabilitation of Nazis. So they, you know, if a person, the private individual, what's to rehabilitate Nazis? I mean, I don't think they're going to go around arresting anybody who says, "Oh, I think Mein Kampf is the best book anyone ever wrote." I don't think that's what they mean. I mean, I think it's what some of the Baltic states have been doing, which is officially sanctioned rehabilitation of Nazism, which is what this is about. But in any case, since when has the United States ever been committed to, you know, a freedom of expression? I mean, it's been leaning on all the social media, because bit hard, you know, with the First Amendment. So the United States gets around it by pressing, you know, the social media to ban all kinds of speech that it doesn't like. And it's been doing this now for many years, you know, ever since Russiagate and all the pressure they put on, you know, Facebook and Twitter to get rid of all the Russia bot accounts, and then, you know, and all the vaccine, the anti-vax accounts and everything else. So, you know, the idea the United States is so passionately cares about free expression, yeah, not buying it. Well, and the Europeans are definitely not buying it, that they care about free speech.
You know, you and I have talked about this before, but, you know, on May 9th, there's the commemorating a victory over fascism in Europe, 1945. That is such an important date in the calendar, even now, even actually more so now.
Right.
Okay. And again, the State Department just gives, you know, scant a reference to that, is that people take this stuff very seriously. When you see the Nazi regalia, you see these battalion patches and stuff like that. Yes, there is a visceral response, visceral.
Right.
Okay, and the State Department just kind of passes it off. Oh, that's peasant artistry, or, you know, what are they talking? You know, they talk that kind of nonsense. You know, oh, that's organic to Ukraine. No, it looks like a swastika to me.
Right, yeah, that's right. I mean, no, but I mean, they've been doing this for years and years, minimizing Russia's contribution to victory in World War II. I mean, you know, it's like they pass it by as if somehow it didn't happen. When was the last time, incidentally, that the Americans and the Europeans actually showed up on May the 9th in any big capacity other than just observers from the embassy? I don't remember.
2007, 8? Yeah. I mean, I remember, I suppose it was, I don't want to guess the date, but I remember there was a snub, as there usually is. And what the Russians did, they invited American veterans, and they came. And they sat in the front row. Okay?
Yes.
They sat in the front row, and it was their victory. And the Russians are saying it's our victory, our collective victory here. I've lived here for a quarter century. I've studied Soviet history. I've studied Russian history. I've never seen once any kind of official pronouncement. Well, you know, the West didn't really participate.
Never.
You know, but you know, Radek Sikorsky will say, Russia, well, there were just some wandering bands of peasants that, you know, came in. I mean, the total, you know, what was the Red Army? What's that? Okay. I mean, that's where we are.
That's, yeah, you're absolutely right. The Russians have never minimized the contribution of the British and the Americans, but the West has. I mean, people like Sikorsky, you know, first they accuse the Soviet Union of starting the war. They say, okay, you know, the Soviet Union, Nazi Germany, they started the war together. They were allies, which they weren't, but that's their thesis. And then they say, oh, well, you know, the Soviets, you know, they made so many strategic blunders, and they lost millions of men because of all their strategic blunders. Yeah, but they were the first to inflict defeats on Nazi Germany. Nobody had done it. Nobody had done it until the fall of 1941. Up until then, you know, everyone had just fallen before the Nazis. I mean, the first heavy defeats inflicted on the Nazis was by the Soviets. So whatever strategic mistakes you make, everyone makes those mistakes. They recovered and began inflicting serious defeats on the Germans.
And I want to be careful. Tens and tens of thousands of Poles fought with the Red Army. Yeah. Okay. Also. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So, yeah, I mean, it's always Keystone Cops or the 007. You know, they always exist at one time. You know, I mean, they strategic blunder, but they did take Berlin. Oh, okay.
Yeah, that's right. Strategic blunder. Yeah, oh yeah, but fought very poorly. You know, oh yeah, well, they wanted Stalingrad. Yeah, okay, they wanted Kursk. Yeah, you know, Bagration and everything else. You know, yeah, that was yeah, okay, but other than that, you know, it was just all luck. You know, it was just the winter. You know, it was the winter.
Well, you know, and you know, Stalin, you know, the Soviets, they worked with the Nazis. They signed an agreement. Well, pre-war Poland signed a non-aggression agreement with Germany, with Nazi Germany.
That's it. Yeah, that's right. But that's the kind of thing that, you know, that Sikorsky comes up with. You know, this is the kind of nonsense. You know, yeah. So yeah, well, they signed an agreement. They were jointly responsible for the war. No, that's not. But yeah, but that's the kind of nonsense that they peddle. But
and if you look at the historical record, if you look at the documents, the Soviets, if you like them or not, Stalin, if you like them or not, they were desperate for some kind of European settlement to avoid the impending war. And you know what the reaction was? Just like December 17th. Oh, well, we might think about it, you know. Okay.
Right. Well, that's right, because, you know, for many in Europe, they thought, okay, a war between Nazi and Germany and Soviet Union, hey, that's okay by me. You know, I don't have a problem with that. They were always quite happy. And Stalin knew that they were perfectly happy with that. So therefore, he knew perfectly well that any pledges given by the Western powers weren't worth the paper they're given on. I mean, the British didn't do anything to help Poland. Why would they do anything to help the Soviet Union if they didn't even do anything to help Poland? I mean, you know, he was a realist.
So let me get this straight, George. So it was Mussolini, it was Hitler, it was Neville Chamberlain, Daladier was there, and they broke up an independent state in the center of Europe, Czechoslovakia. Were the Czechs at the table? Oh, no, they weren't. They were in the next room, okay? If you're sitting in Moscow, you're saying, are these reliable partners? Right. They're willing to cut up one of their own.
Right. Yeah.
Stab one of their own in the back.
Right, yeah. No, I mean, that's right. I mean, they did it, I mean, out of, you know, self-interest. They wanted to delay the war as long as possible, which is, you know, understandable. I mean, if you're the British,
yeah,
you don't want to go to war.
But that means the Soviets have to look after their self-interest, because everybody else is.
That's why all these attacks on Stalin are just so stupid and being on the point. I mean, he's Stalin looking and say, hey, we are going to face this mighty Nazi war machine, soon. Let's delay this as long as possible. And and any responsible leader makes that decision, which is we have to delay this for as long as possible until we're ready to confront this. Unlike Nicholas II, who gets himself into a war which he had absolutely no hope of winning. Stalin was just a lot shrewder. You just delay.
And by the way, I'm going to take a chunk of Finland just to be on the safe side.
Exactly. That's exactly right.
Okay, to wrap up here, I would really like to see the State Department come out with a document about U.S. official representatives dealing with people that hold Nazi values and ideology. This does exist. Okay, the European Union well documented it. All of the different types of radical groups that were in Ukraine prior to 2004, before the Orange Revolution. Right. Okay, and you know, I would like, you know, Victoria Nuland to be under oath and talk about all of these various characters she gave cookies to during the coup. I mean, why doesn't the State Department become transparent and the people that it have dealt with? What was the State Department's knowledge of the violence on the Maidan before Yanukovych fled? What is their knowledge of it? I mean, was it Catherine Ashton was her name? I mean, she was getting like, whoa, what, geez, you know, this looks like it came from both sides. You know, I mean,
yeah, she was on that phone call.
The second guy.
Yeah, was it the Estonian guy or president of Estonia? Yeah, and she was so, well, that's interesting. Well, we need to look into that. Yeah, he's telling her, well, you know, what we're getting is that he was actually coming, the shooting was coming from the other side. It was from the building that was controlled by the opposition. Interesting. Definitely, we definitely need to look into that. And of course, nothing would ever happen from Catherine Ashton's end.
So when the State Department publishes and posts such nonsense, I mean, on its face nonsense, it means they know they're losing the narrative war.
Right. And exactly, and you know, and they don't have any supporting evidence. Like, you know, where are the you know, can you come up with, you know, Russian units going around, you know, with swastikas or anything, any indication at all of anti-Semitism, Nazism, whatever. So they resort to this usual kind of Western media, particularly American media. You kind of distort and take out of context words, and you think, well, if you just take a snippet here and the snippet there, it sounds like he's, you know, endorsing Hitler. I mean, it's so juvenile. I mean, this, you know, Western media have been playing this game since forever. But in this context, it just looks particularly pathetic.
Yeah. I mean, the praise of Nazi ideology, of people that proclaim to be Nazis or fascists. I mean, it doesn't happen here.
No.
It doesn't happen.
That's right. That's right. And what was that guy, Sean Walker? Remember that at the time of the 2018 World Cup, when he said, "Oh yeah, there was this Russian bar, and these Russians were singing these Nazi songs." Damn! I left my phone at home, wasn't able to record this.
Yeah, he saw the Russian army invade Donbass. But his camera, he forgot.
I left the camera at home.
That's how far you stoop to it. Okay. What's really interesting is that, you know, cap it off here, is that the State Department, you know, nominally tasked with diplomacy, doesn't have one word about diplomacy.
No, that's right. You know, all of this, you know, these ridiculous accusations, and it's, you know, I mean, what do they hope to achieve by this? I mean, what they're seeking? They're going to persuade the public, you know, that they. I mean, this document is not going to persuade anyone. I mean, anyone's going to read this and say that's your case. Some guy, Soloviev, had said, allegedly said, Zelensky is not a real Jew, or, you know, again, look at the context of what Soloviev was talking about.
This is a TV show anchor. He's kind of like Russia's Sean Hannity. Right. He doesn't represent anyone but himself.
Exactly.
Okay. I mean, it would be as if, you know, Russia's version of foreign affairs saying, well, Sean Hannity said, which means it's American foreign policy. No, that's his one big mouth's opinion. Okay.
No, but that's a classic of the way the U.S. propagandist always presented that any Russian at all. Well, he's obviously very close to Putin. I mean, he's obviously Putin's propagandist. So whoever it is, you know, anybody, we're always, you know, close to Putin.
Got a lot of friends.
I know, it's really nice. You know, everyone. They even said that.
Look, you guys, look, for 8 years on the political programs here in Russia, every single night, criticism of Putin's government not supporting the people of the Donbass, night after night after night,
Right.
Okay?
Right. Yeah, no,
and you know, talk about having, it was a real debate, because in the West, what is Russia doing in Ukraine? And here was, why isn't Russia doing more in Ukraine? No one wants to ever point that out. Public opinion is very, very sensitive on the issue of the Donbass. That's the primary reason that they are supportive of the special military operation. Finally, children are not hiding in their cellars, okay? You know, what is it Poroshenko said, you know, the children of the Donbass, you know, our Ukrainian children will go to school, but the people of the Donbass will cower in their basements. I'm paraphrasing.
Right. Yeah, no, that's right. That's right.
All right, everyone. We give you the good, bad, and the ugly. Usually it's bad and ugly, because when it comes to the State Department, you don't have too many.
It is definitely the bad and the ugly.
Okay. All right. This is The Gaggle with Peter and George. We're on Local, so please go to thegaggle.locals.com. Please visit our store, and every Tuesday and Thursday, well, you know what I'm going to say, live.
It's exactly. I mean, we're hearing now serious crisis talks going on at Joe Rogan's office. Managers have been fired because they just the audience base is just collapsing before my onslaught. So Tuesday and Thursday, 3 p.m. Eastern time on Locals, my live stream. Please join me. Come with comments, criticisms, suggestions. Everything is welcome. And on the way out the door to the local watering hole, if you've got a few bob in your pocket, whip them out. Think of, Peter's dogs. Look at how depressed and morose they are. See if you can help them out. The more you're able to donate, the more of these videos we can make, the more we can invest in improved technology. And above all, we can lift the dogs' mood. You know, they can get them out of their slump, which is all that really matters. So remember, if you like The Gaggle, please like, share, and subscribe. See you soon. Bye.